Namaskar. The Myanmarese parliament, which was elected in November, began its first session today, and the parliament is dominated by members of the National League for Democracy, which won about 80% of the seats. Now, this is another major step towards a long drawn-out transfer of power, but at the same time, one that is being conducted peacefully. The NLD of Aung San Suu Kyi is now in the process of forming a government after the decades-long struggle against the junta that had ruled Myanmar for 49 years, and in 2011 it gave way to the semi-civilian government of President Thein Sein, who remains in office until April. Now, despite the optimism, analysts believe that the months ahead are likely to be tense. The junta drafted constitution for one bars Suu Kyi from becoming president, and it gives the military control over 3 security ministries and a quarter of the seats in parliament. This will force the NLD into constant negotiations with the army. The NLD leaders say that they are looking at the future and will leave the past behind them. But they also say that they will not push for an immediate overhaul of the constitution. This is significant because about 115 of those 390 MPs of the NLD are former political prisoners. And to understand the situation and to discuss the road ahead, we have with us in the studio Brigadier Vinod Anand is a senior fellow at the Vivekananda International Foundation, and Mr. Rajiv Bhatia is a distinguished former member of the Indian Foreign Service who served as India's ambassador to Myanmar. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us.
Thank you.
We'll start with you, Ambassador Bhatia. Now, this is a long process of change. We've seen that, well, most people say it is for the good, but it's such a long process of change. You know, anything can happen in between. Are you quite confident that, the peaceful process is continuing?
I think we all are reasonably confident and optimistic that Myanmar is at last on the right trajectory, on the road towards becoming a full-fledged democracy someday in the future. It has been a very dark and dismal journey, but I think the change began to happen. The transition began to happen in 2010, that is at the time of last elections.
Right.
And the outgoing President Thein Sein, who is a retired general, played a significant role in bringing political reforms and economic reforms, and above all, initiating a process of reconciliation with the NLD and Madame Aung San Suu Kyi.
Right.
She is an icon, a brave leader, but now a very pragmatic leader. So, considering everything, we have every reason to be hopeful.
But Brigadier Vinod Anand, the army, or let's say the armed forces, they still control the key ministries, defense, home, border. Would that in a way, stifle the new government completely, because these are key ministries?
Like the Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia said, it's a military drafted constitution where 25% of the MPs or even in the state assemblies are selected by the military. So therefore, it's very difficult to bring any constitutional amendment in the present setup, in the this kind of power structure. So unless we go for amendment, which is quite possible, because last year Aung San Suu Kyi had been trying to force amendment through some other route by, for instance, adopting for a national referendum.
Okay.
So there are other ways by which this constitution perhaps could be tinkered with. So unless that is done, the military would continue to dominate the power structure.
But Ambassador Bhatia, is there a need to transform the constitution, because that would probably antagonize the armed forces a little bit?
I don't think that constitutional reform is going to be a top priority for the new government. Let us be very clear, the new government is going to be like a car with 2 drivers. The driver number 1, Madame Aung San Suu Kyi, the driver number 2, the military chief, that is the commander-in-chief Min Aung Hlaing.
Okay.
Everything will move if these two broadly agree and the institutions that they represent are agreed. And the indications coming from Naypyidaw and from Yangon are clear. There is a basic understanding between these two institutions and these two top personalities.
Okay.
And that is the reason why we are hopeful that even without going to the route of constitutional reform, this country will begin to handle its immediate challenges.
Brigadier Anand, the ex-prisoners, political prisoners, they are basically making up most of what is Parliament today. That must be, I mean, after all, you have been under the junta, you've been treated badly, you've been in jail. There must be some sort of feeling, that let's get back, or not, in terms of let's assert our power.
But you see, all these kind of feelings or angst against the military, I think a good leadership like Aung San Suu Kyi, like she is providing, so they, I think, have been able to overcome this kind of feeling to an extent, and they are looking forward to a very hopeful or a better future. And as of now, as the situation demands, there needs to be a cooperation between the NLD and the military, so that a better future could be carved out for Myanmar.
What makes this different, Ambassador Bhatia, from 1990, when the military dismissed the elections and then, just continued power? Why is it so different now?
Just allow me 30 seconds to answer partly the previous thing, because I have a point of view.
Sure.
Myanmar is a Buddhist country. A vast majority of people are Buddhists, and that teaches you to forget about all the injuries that have been done to you, and you look to the future and you look to forgiveness. So it is that which is a major reason why people are not.
And in fact, most of the MPs are quoted as saying that, in fact, exactly
right.
what
I'm
you're
glad
saying.
to hear that.
Yes.
And the second thing is pragmatism of Madame Aung San Suu Kyi.
Right.
She is essentially a pragmatic politician. She has realized that if you try to take the path of revenge against the army, then you'll get nothing. So she wants now to build on what she has achieved.
How is it different from 1990?
1990, the world was different. At that time, there were different leaders of the military. They were driven by the classical doctrine, which was developed in Nevin's time and subsequently, which basically believed that military is the mother or father and the people are its children. That it is military's responsibility to guide the people.
Okay.
Today, now it is different. They are beginning to recognize the democratic urges and the meaning of this decisive mandate of 8th November.
Brigadier Anand, even at that time, Government of India did support Aung San Suu Kyi, but after some time, because of practical reasons, the government had to start dealing with the junta itself because of the presence of a lot of insurgent groups in Myanmar that were operating against India. So, but then that didn't quite go down too well with the National League for Democracy at that time. Do you think these things are forgotten?
There are two issues why India did that. One was, of course, the insurgency, and second was, you see, by about 1992, India had unveiled its economic reforms and Look East policy. So Myanmar is the linchpin of our Look East and now Act East policy.
Yes.
Therefore, it was in our strategic interest to open up to Myanmar. And as also on the insurgency issue, yes, we needed cooperation from Myanmar along our about 1643 kilometer long border. So there are a whole lot of insurgent groups operating, and there is still some amount of gun running and drug smuggling and whole kind of nefarious activities going all along the border. So to that extent, India and Myanmar, I mean, both were keen to have security and stability along the borders. So therefore, it was also in the interest of India to open up to Myanmar.
But India has obviously always been supporting democracy as a system of governance, and so India would always be very, forthcoming towards the developments that are taking place in Myanmar, at least over the last few years. The change.
That is absolutely true, and if I may just say, there are two more factors. One is that it has been consistently India's policy to deal with a government which is in power.
Okay.
So when we found that military was actually running the country, we had no choice but to shift our focus on building ties with the military government. I was a personal witness and a bit player in that drama.
But at the same time, we did not lose our focus
we followed
on
what
the
we
NLD,
call the dual track policy.
Right.
We continue to support politically and morally and in other fashion Madame Aung San Suu Kyi, but we decided that we must do business with those who are in power. But sir, the second thing is very important, which is the China factor, if you allow me.
Sure.
When Western countries and initially India and ASEAN, everybody was opposed to the military government, then Chinese got a huge open field to consolidate the relationship with Yangon.
That's right. And they built a strategic partnership with
That's right. And as this became clear, India had no choice but to step in and try to improve and strengthen our relationship with the military rulers.
Brigadier Anand, looking at the Chinese question now, because China has spent a lot of time, they've had a close relationship with the military rulers, and maybe under President Thein Sein, this has come down a little bit because democracy is functioning. But China, continues with large investments in Myanmar, and even the NLD is favorable towards China and their presence there.
There are two things. One is, of course, the Chinese presence. I think after 2011, when the previous or the present government came in, there was some decline in a kind of relationship, because earlier for 2 decades, China's presence had increased very much in Myanmar because of the nature of the government in Myanmar, and of course Chinese, and there was a kind of crony capitalism and all kind of links, and I mean Chinese were more interested in the resources of Myanmar and the Myanmar military. The generals also profited a lot. But after 2011, that kind of relationship has gone, it has declined. And and thereafter, the Chinese leadership, they also started developing a relationship with Aung San Suu Kyi. They invited the NLD.
Yes.
And in fact, last year, Aung San Suu Kyi visited China at the invitation of. So even like I said, and like the ambassador has said, that Aung San Suu Kyi is very pragmatic. She wants investments from China,
right?
But because Myanmar is opening to West and others,
right.
She also wants from other sources. So therefore, she is exercising a kind of balance between China.
But
and
Ambassador
others.
Bhatia, the fact is that China has also supported insurgency within Myanmar. And at least reports seem to suggest that, even the current insurgency that's taking place in the north has a lot of support from Chinese. So as a result, the government of the day would have to deal with China, whatever.
Absolutely. I think you have put your finger on the central point. China, I think, remains the most strong and powerful neighbor for Myanmar. Perhaps the most important neighbor as well, because they have that particular leverage through the ethnic factors, and they have therefore the possibility to create troubles if they so want. At the same time, they have a very extensive, as Brigadier Saab has said, relationship which stretches into the political, economic, and even people-to-people relationship. A lot of Chinese people have come actually into Myanmar.
Okay.
So Madame Suu Kyi has this big challenge to see how to balance the relationship with China on one hand,
yes,
and the relationship with the West, which has been her supporter for the past 25 years.
Right.
So for us in India, one of the most interesting things would be to watch as to how she strikes a balance between Beijing and Washington.
Okay, and obviously with regard to India, Ambassador Bhatia, she has, after all, spent a lot of time here. She studied here as well. In that respect, how can one, look forward to the relationship with the new government?
I can say on the basis of a very close study, the results of which were reflected in my recently published book, and also my personal interactions with her both in 2012 when she came here and in 2013 when I went to Myanmar leading a group of scholars. She has intensely friendly attitude and sentiments towards India. The moment she knows that you have come from India, she would tell you about her experiences, positive experiences in India. Her, the deep impact the doctrine of Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru and other Indian leaders has had on her. She talks about, her latest meeting with the Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi, and she has very constant contacts with the Indian Embassy and the Indian Ambassador. So this is a golden opportunity for India to deepen and strengthen India-Myanmar relationship.
Brigadier Anand, a little while earlier, you were talking about the Act East policy. Now, this is a significant part, and in the current context, Myanmar will also be playing an important role in ASEAN. And India's northeast also has a very significant, bearing on this relationship with our Act East policy. We share a large border with Myanmar, 1,000-kilometer plus border. All this is so important. How would you see, in terms of trying to take this relationship forward under the new government? What should India be doing?
In fact, the current government, after taking over in May 2014, I think one of their key areas of thrust was converting Look East policy to Act East policy. And Myanmar, in fact, hosted the ASEAN summit in 2014, where, of course, Prime Minister Modi was also there. And thereafter, our Minister of External Affairs, she's been there, and as part of our Look East and Act East policy, even many of the political leadership, including President, they have been visiting some of these Southeast Asian countries. Now, as far as Myanmar is concerned, I a while ago explained that Myanmar is in fact a strategic both land bridge, even through the maritime boundary, we are connected to Myanmar and the ASEAN countries beyond.
Right.
So to that extent, Myanmar plays a very important part in our Act
Can
East,
drive right down to Singapore through Myanmar, right?
There are many
someday.
There are a number of initiatives in force. There's a BIMSTEC, there is a trilateral India, Myanmar, Thailand highway, there is a Ganga Mekong initiative. So the only problem remains is how to implement some of the initiatives in time. India has also a number of projects going in Myanmar. So to that extent, India has been trying to strengthen its relationship with Myanmar, and with Aung San Suu Kyi, I suppose it's going to be further strengthened.
So, Ambassador Bhatia, India is not really objecting to China's presence in Myanmar to that extent in terms of what can be done as for the economic development of Myanmar, because India also will benefit also by developing its own infrastructure and capabilities through this region. But is there some sort of concern, with the West, that we would be lining up one particular side to try and it is at the cost of China's presence? Is that something that is part of the geostrategic vision, not of India but of the bigger players?
Well, yes, I think first of all, you are absolutely right. India is not in a position formally and openly in any fashion to say anything one way or the other as to what kind of foreign policy Myanmar should adopt. It is for them to decide. But with regard to China, I think our relationship is both of competition and cooperation, and that certainly extends to Myanmar as well. Speaking of the larger region, analysts are very fond of saying that the new great game is unfolding today.
Okay.
Everybody understands what the meaning of that game is. We have to understand who is doing what. All that I think India really wants is that every country, including China, should simply adhere to international law and follow the conventional and accepted norms.
Sure.
But one thing, allow me to add, talking of Madame Aung San Suu Kyi, I have no doubt that government to government relationship would improve further.
Right.
What she has always consistently said is this.
Right.
The most important thing is the relationship at the level of people. So, if you were to ask me what we should do, I hope there will be a larger number of Buddhist pilgrims from Myanmar.
Okay.
I hope there will be greater contacts at the level of civil society, strategic community, think tanks, universities. And above all, I hope Indian media will go out of its way to bring to its viewers and readers as to what is happening in Myanmar. I hope Doordarshan will seize the opportunity and send a team to cover what happens in the next 4 weeks in that country.
Brigadier Anand, do you feel that, this process is a little long? This is the question I started off with. And in this context, there could be, some sort of feeling within the armed forces that they are losing power and that they would try to, try and stage a coup or something.
Well, first...
I mean, we're watching everything and it's happened peacefully still now. But then there are some analysts who say there's a tense period that is going to happen now.
No, you see, 2 months, or maybe this is the second month after the elections. Yes, it's a long process.
No, but they're still in power.
They're still in power. In fact, in last 2-3 days, they tried to do some tinkering with the ministries so that there's one key ministry comes under the home or the interior affairs.
Yeah.
So to that extent, I think they have tried, but they also know the downside, the military. So to that extent, I would like to hope that they will continue on this reform path and do not go back to the days of 90s.
Because one of the realizations for them, Ambassador Bhatia, would be that even in an area where there were a lot of ex-army people, or they seem to have been in a majority where the army candidate could have won, the army candidate lost, which means that perhaps even members within the armed forces who have retired or whatever are in support of the NLD.
But we can also argue that the change from pure military rule to transition and now to the increased quotient of democracy, it all has come from the military itself.
That's right.
In other words, the change has come from within.
Right.
So even though there may be some people within the armed forces who are not terribly happy with the way things are going, but the leadership which controls the armed forces is actually an encouraging movement.
So and one final word on democracies itself, because the larger player who we did talk about, China, is not quite a democracy. Do you think that, over a period of time, this sentiment of democracy may actually worry China?
Well, I mean, I should only talk about the country that I know well. China is a huge separate entity, but I think Chinese scholars have been telling us clearly that if Myanmar wants to go on the democratic path, it is their decision.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us here on this special discussion. Well, the new parliament is dominated by people who were once political prisoners. This reveals that the people had voted out the military government. And India has favored democracy, though it did maintain ties with the junta. China, too, which had not supported the pro-democracy movement, has accepted the changes. Now the new lawmakers will be picking parliamentary speakers who will then elect vice presidents, and one of those vice presidents will become the president. Aung San Suu Kyi has already said that she would stay above the president and lead the country. Thanks very much for watching. Namaskar.